It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the Coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in the control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person was torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day listeners and welcome to Hard Hats and High Vis, week 5 of the Australian federal election campaign. And this is where the two Jacks meet. Jack the Insider, that's me, Peter Hoysted to my mum, and Hong Kong Jack, that's Jack Hoysted, former Labor man. G'day, Jack.
G'day, Jack, how are you?
And you're in Hong Kong, mate, having another public holiday.
We do love a public holiday up here. This one, it's called the Buddha's birthday.
Happy birthday to the great Gautama Buddha. It's fantastic work. So you're a man of leisure again.
And a shout out to an old Cobra mate of mine, Gary Hocking, who carried the name for a couple of hundred AFL games.
Yeah. Do you see many Hongkonese get down to the shrine and lay a bit of food or whatever in front of a photo of Gary Hocking?
I was having this conversation with some locals yesterday, and none of them could quite work out what you're supposed to do on the Buddha's birthday either. So I think they probably go shopping. You know.
Fair enough. Sounds good. Get down, get into a drink nice and early.
Yeah.
Look, Hard Hats and High Vis is an election podcast where we go behind the media and use our expertise developed over too many elections to count. Too many, Jack. Far too many. Here to tell you so we're really here to tell you what's going on behind all the nonsense. And we need your help to spread the good word of this podcast to political animals everywhere. If you like what you're listening to, please give us a shout out on social media. Tell your friends, spread the good word, that sort of thing. We'd love to hear from you too. So drop us a line to our email address, which is the conditionalreleaseprogram@gmail.com. Just mark it to Jacks and we'll answer it. Now, there was a great debate, Jack, probably on Channel 9. They don't beam to Hong Kong, so you might have missed it.
I got bits and pieces, yeah.
Yeah, look, I was watching Carlton tear Adelaide Crows apart, and I've got to say, when I did flip over, it was a lot less entertaining, the great debate. The first thing I want to say is that where's the ABC? Why don't we do any nationwide great debates using the national broadcaster to an audience of potentially 27 million Australians?
Well, the ABC certainly seemed to have the hump about not being asked.
Well, I know actually that a number of pleading requests were made to both political leaders. So what are they doing, Jack? Are the political leaders, that is, never mind the ABC for a moment, are the political leaders, Albo and Scott Morrison, are they saying, well, we don't really want to go national? We'd prefer to keep the audience a bit smaller?
Well, I think from Albo's point of view, if you didn't have a debate at all, it would probably help because they're going along okay. You know?
Yeah, that sort of thing. I mean, do debates matter? Have they ever mattered?
No, not really.
Not really. I mean, I think the media sort of watches these things waiting for that gotcha moment, that moment that everything falls apart for one or the other. And they go on the skids. I don't remember it ever happening.
The political class, the political pundits, the people who are members of political parties, who open the newspaper every morning and read the politics first rather than the sport, they love the debates and they're important to them. But almost all of them have made up their minds, weeks ago. In fact, they're probably lining up to vote this morning. But for the people who are going to decide the election, that is the people who might read the sport first, they don't care too much about debates. They don't normally watch them.
Yeah, I went looking for the ratings of the show. They were up on 60 Minutes normal ratings, but not. Channel 9 wasn't beset with millions of viewers. Also, their website crashed because they did have people it just seems tedious. I don't know why anyone would want to do this. They could scan the symbol on the screen and then provide an indication of who they thought had won and who they were going to vote for, but the whole thing crashed, and it didn't really come to anything. The data became impure, but the commentariat, I have to say, veered between an elbow win and a draw, but it just did have I guess for so many voters, the big sort of ho-hum about it. And I don't know that it captured the imagination of the Australian people all that much.
How dull would your life have to be that you wanted to spend your Sunday evening downloading something from a television show to vote on who's winning a political debate?
You can get the QR code and off you go.
Yeah.
I mean, really, you'd have to be a bit desperate. But
Yeah,
I guess so many did that the site crashed. I mean, you'd have to say, Channel 9, have a bit of a look at your servers, because I can't imagine that there'd be more than a few thousand who'd go through that process of the QR code and then pop in, yes or no answers to the questions and give them some data. It's going to be like tens of thousands maybe, but that was enough to crash their servers, which was very funny.
Yeah, if that's what you're doing on Sunday night, can I recommend getting the Scrabble board out?
Yeah, it's going to be far more enlightening getting the Scrabble board out too. Bit of wordsmithing. Another elbow gaff last week, Jack. After we recorded, I think we got to Tuesday. He was in. I think he was in the seat of Richmond, up north anyway, in North New South Wales, and was unable to answer the 6 points of his NDIS policy, and had to go away and read them, and then come back and provide them.
It wasn't that he couldn't remember the 6 points of the NDIS reform program that mattered. It was that he wasn't quick enough on his feet to say, "Look, Bill's going to be taking you through those."
That's the thing. Yeah. Let me introduce you to the relevant minister.
Bill's the bloke who designed this thing, and he's going to redesign it. So he'll take you through what we need to do to get it right.
Exactly right. Why doesn't he do those things? I mean, he's got the deer in the headlights look about him, and perhaps I was going to suggest, by way of excuse, he's just a couple of weeks off COVID, and it can scramble the brain a little bit. So they say. I've never had COVID, and I don't think you have either. But
if it scrambles the brain, I must have had it.
Well, I mean, I might have had a bit of an asymptomatic infection there too. But yeah, look, it's just there's no escaping that he's just not across policy. And if you're not across policy, then that's your response. Here, let me introduce you to Bill Shorten, who knows all about this. It must be said that there was quite aggressive questioning, and that's just the way to straight bat it, Let me just get Bill over here for you. He's in charge of this policy. He wrote the original NDIS, and he's
the father of the NDIS.
Why wouldn't you want to listen to it straight from the horse's mouth? And the same thing goes. Housing. Jason Clare, come over here, Jason. Come and talk to these people about housing, about our housing policy. I mean, he's just really slow to do those things, and other than that, I think Labor have gone okay, but there is this concern that he's not across policy detail, and if he's not across it, there's better ways of dealing with it than stammering in front of a camera.
Yeah, you can't imagine Paul Keating getting nervous like that with a question like that, can you?
Well, he'd know if he didn't know the answer, he'd attack the journalist.
Exactly. The journalist would probably still be having counselling now. To get over the bollocking they would have got from Keating.
Speak to me. You know who I am. Don't speak to me like that.
Yeah. So he doesn't have that about him, but still the Labor campaign's sort of rolling along okay.
Yeah.
And that's okay. They're in front. I think. So what's not happening for the Liberal Party is that they don't look to be cutting through and making much ground just yet.
Not at this early stage, but we are at least at that stage as of today, as we started recording. In fact, voting has been open now, or the polls have been open now for just over 4 hours, Jack. And vote early, vote often, I suppose you might say. But there are still requirements that you have to go through if you decide to in-person pre-poll. And it's very funny because there've been two additions actually. You can suggest your fear of getting COVID. It would be a reason for you pre-polling. You have to have a reason. You have to have a valid reason. And one of the new ones is a fear of getting COVID, and another one is a fear of crowds. But what happens, and this happened to my daughter when she came in and pre-polled with me in a state election. They didn't ask me, but they asked her why she was pre-polling, and she was struck dumb. And then they just said, "Look, here's a list of reasons. Just pick one. Pick one." And she did. Oh, no, there you go. So it's all very silly, but we are expecting, we talked about this in previous episodes, we're expecting maybe 25% pre-polling and around 20% postals, with getting up towards half of the vote cast as being cast before election day. You don't think it's a good thing? I know you understand the practicalities of it, but there is that sort of, we are missing out a little bit on that sense of excitement around an election day, because most people have cast their votes. It may well be the majority of people have cast their votes by then. But yes, you have to have a reason. So if you are pre-polling in person, look at the list and pick one.
This is a bit like the old days when I can't remember, in the early 90s in Sydney, and you'd go to some establishments for a drink and they'd have to ask you, "Do you intend dining?"
That's right.
And the answer had to be yes.
That's right.
And they come around and ask you that, and they didn't get that. They knew you weren't going to eat there because their food was inedible, and no one ever ate it. But that would be the first question they asked. "Do you intend dining with us tonight?" Yeah.
Absolutely, I will be at 12:30 in the wee hours of the morning. That's right. And look, it actually stretched in some licensed premises to the point where you had to order a bowl of chips.
Yes,
and so you could get around them stupid, arcane liquor licensing laws in this state, which have fortunately been changed. There's a long way to go yet. Much better in Victoria, by the way. But yeah, so look, if you're going to pre-poll in person early, pick a reason. You can be frightened of crowds. You could be a vampire. And that you need to basically get out and about when it's just turned dark, and about 5:30, 5:45 in New South Wales. So yeah, we've started, and it does mean that having looked at the pre-polling behaviour in past years, in 2019 in particular, you still get that rush 2 or 3 days beforehand. So most of it comes, the in-person pre-polling, most of it comes on the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday before election day. So I don't think you'll get too many casts today. A few, not too many. But last week, as anticipated, Jack, interest rates went up. The official cash rate is now 0.35, and mortgages running fixed rates around 3%. We do know the history of this. In 2007, it was kind of the last nail in the coffin for John Howard. Is it going to have as big an effect as it did in 2007?
Hard to know, but I will say this: it's just not helping Morrison to get any momentum, and he kind of needs that at the moment.
And that's because all of a sudden that shifts into a greater discussion on cost of living, with inflationary pressures in the economy, people noticing the price of staples, foods, etc., going through we're going in a rapid acceleration. You should try and buy an iceberg lettuce around here, Jack. Very expensive. About $5 an iceberg lettuce will set you back.
Yeah.
But that's actually due to flooding in northern New South Wales. It does basically allow Labor, perhaps it's not a great strength of Labor to talk about the cost of living, but it's not something the government wants to be talking about at all.
No. And at the moment, what he needs is something he can talk about that will give him some momentum. And at the moment, and the interest rate question and the cost of living question is stalling his momentum when he most needs it.
And it wouldn't be a discussion on the Solomon Islands either. I'm just reading there that China looks like it's going to turn into Guangzhou. Going to be highways and big ports and underground cables running there to Beijing and so forth. Not a lot of love to be had or advantage to be had for Scott Morrison in discussions about foreign policy either.
They do like to build a highway when they go to these places, the Chinese. And a port.
The plans for the port are spectacular. So we do have some longer term issues going on there in terms of foreign policy. But it's okay, Jack. Everything's all right because John Howard's back. John Howard, they've unlocked the cage and rolled the stone away, and he's popped out and he's he's had an attack on Elbow. Reckons Elbow's trying to weasel his way into the lodge with no policies.
Yeah, I don't know about these retired fellas coming back and have another run. I mean, it's always good to see the former players, turn up before the match and shake a few hands, but I'm not so sure about it. From the coalition point of view, it's better to have John Howard out there than Malcolm Turnbull.
Well, Malcolm did stick his nose in all the way from New York, and while he was a bit vague, he seemed to be suggesting that Liberal voters in Wentworth and other, shall we say, inner city electorates like North Sydney, etc., might consider voting for the Teal independents. So Malcolm is in that not helping mode.
Was it Shakespeare who said, "The hell hath no fury like a woman scorned," and that's exactly what Malcolm's like. I mean, in fact, Malcolm and Kevin Rudd are very similar in that regard. They are still the girlfriend you dumped in fourth form. And they're still cross about it.
I'd say I was talking to him not so long back. I had a long conversation with Malcolm 2 or 3 months ago, and I wouldn't say he was raw. I wouldn't say his anger was still raw. But he's going to take every opportunity to give his successor a bit of a slapping whenever he can. He's just if there's something there that Scott Morrison's not going to like, Malcolm's there to just give it a little push. But John Howard, I mean, John's well into his 80s now, and they have dragged him out in state elections. He was prominent in the South Australian state election, Jack, and we all know how that went. I think he's got a strike rate. What do we say? Strike rate of a pedestrian medium pacer. He's not going all that well. You might put 2019 in the win basket for John, but others, I don't know that he's doing all that much good.
Look, I think these sort of things are probably good for the morale of your own troops. But I don't think people say, well, I'm going to vote for Scott Morrison again because John Howard reckons he's okay. I just can't see that myself.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's going to sway too many votes. I mean, particularly dragging out a bloke who looks like he should be spending the afternoon at the Bowls Club. I don't know that that's going to have a big effect. Yeah, you're right. It probably is a bit of a morale boost for probably the flagging energies of volunteer workers for the Liberal Party at the moment. Now, our big theme today, Jack, and it's sort of running prominently through the election campaign, it's the independents. And we're not just talking Teal independents, although that's a big block of them. It's looking increasingly likely, or more likely, that Labor will form a majority government. But the crossbenches may well still be filled with a handful of Teals, more than a handful, very likely. And we might even see a bit of a boost to the Greens, with the possibility they could do okay in some Queensland seats. Why is there a shift away from the major parties?
Well, this is not just happening in Australia. This is happening around the Western world. The progressive parties, the left parties, if you like, used to be the party of the working class and the unionists, really.
So fundamentally from the left.
Yeah, yeah. But these days, the progressive classes, the progressive parties, the left parties, have become the party of the professional urban class, the academics, the lawyers, the doctors, the accountants. They're the ones who support the progressive parties. And the conservative parties have become the parties of the working class and the rural and regional poor.
Well, I would say in this case, particularly when we talk about the Teal independents, looking good things in Mackellar, which is in the upper north shore of Sydney, North Sydney there, another electorate at risk, Wentworth, of course, in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, Goldstein, Bayside suburb, centred around Brighton, St Kilda, Elwood in Melbourne, and Kooyong, Hawthorn, Kew, leafy, green, conservative areas. It seems that a lot of voters, they may be economically conservative, but in terms of social policy, they veer progressive.
They do, and this is not a peculiarly Australian thing. It's happened in the UK. It's happened in France. It's happened in the US. And I suspect that the Teal independence and the move to green in inner urban seats is all part of that same trend.
Well, can we move into a bit of wild speculation now? And let's say that Labor wins majority government. They get to 76, 77, 78, might even be better. But there's still this block of crossbenchers that might be 10 or 12 wide. There might be 10 or 12 numbers there. There might be some party aligned. There might be two Greens. There's obviously will be Adam Bant. He's one. So there might be two Greens. There might be, certainly Bob Catter will be returned. So there'll be a Catter Australia party. Rebecca Sharkey, the bookies, are nominally calling Centre Alliance. So she's got a party affiliation, which is a bit dodgy, just between you and me. And then we've got Sally Stegel, and then we've got Wilkie and Clark and Helen Haynes in Indi. Let's say there's another 6, and they all come pretty much from the coalition. Let's say 6 of them do. I mean, what chance?
Well, they all come from traditional coalition seats.
Yeah.
But to add to that, it looks like we might be getting a growing number of the inner urban Greens.
That's right. There is talk in Brisbane that the Greens candidate in Brisbane might come second there, and if she comes second there, she'll win it.
That's the battle. Whoever comes second there is likely to be it's likely to be a good
winner.
Chance to win.
Yeah. And then there's a blue ribbon electorate of Ryan that some insiders are saying might well be in danger. That's a Liberal blue ribbon seat, not in danger from Teals, but a different colour on the spectrum, Greens. So the Greens might end up with. So what I'm saying is, how easy will it be to win these seats back? I mean, if we look at Wilkie, Andrew Wilkie in Clark, once he was elected, he hasn't had to go to preferences, and he took his seat from Labor.
This is slightly uncharted territory as to how easy it will be to get them back. I don't think we know. As I say, I think we're part of a worldwide phenomenon where there is a sort of shift in allegiances, or not quite a direct swap, but there is a swing in allegiances, and how that's going to play out over the next 5 or 10 years is we'll have to wait and see.
Well, what we do know is Steggles an absolute certainty. Wilkie's a certainty. Helen Haynes is a certainty. Rebecca Sharkey, the one the bookies reckon's not an independent, she's a certainty to win in Mayo. And they've been around she's been around for a little while, of course. I mean, Mayo is, Liberal heartland. And it would seem to me that so if the Liberals do go down and lose a number of their marginals to Labor, and then suffer losses at the other end of the scale, if you like, in their blue ribbon seats, that's going to make the task much, much harder come the following election. That you'll have to basically try and win the blue ribbons back somehow. But you'll also have to try and win more marginals than you would have in the instance where you weren't getting attacked at the bottom end, where your fairly safe seats are.
Well, it's going to be a situation where to win government, you've got to cobble together a bit of an alliance of both progressives and socially conservative people.
There is, of course, the question of a balance of power, and we have discussed this, and both you and I agree that in the event where the Teal independents, not that they'll necessarily be seen as they'll be seen as a bloc, but whether they'll vote as a bloc, I don't think so. But whether they would support the outgoing government or support Labor, I think it's more likely that they would support Scott Morrison, but Scott Morrison and the coalition government. But that won't even come into play, certainly if Labor win a majority, but it certainly won't come into play if the coalition comes back after the election with 60, 64, 65 seats.
No.
All right. Now, we'll just get to the polling, Jack. You might have seen the news poll released today.
I did.
Not much change. Labor's up one and the two-party preferred to 39, and that takes us to 54-46 two-party preferred. Let me just go back to the primary. At 39, that's where Labor needs to be. They need to be high 30s, low 40s.
You would expect to win with 39.
Yeah, would expect to win with 39. Exactly right. So the 54-46, though, I mean, polling companies won't tell you this, but the two-party preferred is a bit of a nonsense figure, isn't it? There are so many assumptions there being made around that you could be easily a couple of points out and no one's going to worry about it too much.
Oh, yeah. I never take much notice of that figure.
There are some interesting figures in the minors. The Greens are polling at 15%, Jack. Good Lord. That's high for them. That'd be garden party stuff if that happens in an election. But we are seeing this shift away. We've got the Teal independents knocking on the door. They won't affect a national vote too much because they're only represented in a handful of seats. But we've also got Pauline Hanson's One Nation sitting around 5% in the polling, and that would indicate a sort of doubling of their vote. UAP on 4, which is pretty much where they managed to get in 2019. But Pauline Hanson at 5%, that's much more than she got. So that's all part of that trend, isn't it?
It's certainly an indication of something that I think I can see, and that is that perhaps the government has run its course, but there's no particular affection for Labor.
Yeah, that just seems to fit all the trends on what we're talking about here. Other minor parties, independents running in certain seats, and it. We'll get to my best bets in a moment because it will reflect that. The betting markets are Labor is firm price wobbled around a bit last week, but at Labor at $1.35, and they went down, I think, to about $1.33, and then back up to $1.35. And the coalition now was at 2.10 2 weeks ago. Now it's 3.20. So that's fairly significant. Now, of course, we don't know how big the pools are. We don't know how much money's gone down on the head-to-head, but that would indicate pretty much it's following, well, perhaps not following it, the polling might be following it, but taken in conjunction with polling, it would indicate that Labor stands a much better chance of forming a majority than perhaps it did 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, well, that's certainly how it looks.
To top that, Labor's now favoured to win 9 coalition marginals, although it's sort of bit neck and neck in Braddon and in Robertson, Braddon in Tasmania and Robertson in New South Wales. But the margins have changed in Chisholm, when Labor is now firm favourite to win Chisholm. Swan and Pearce have always been favourite, and there is indeed a chance that they could pick up a third seat, Ken Wyatt's seat. Hasluck is probably in play. Boothby, they look strong. They're firm favourites in South Australia. Braddon in Tasmania, firm favourites. And Longman in Queensland, they seem to have firmed a bit there too. So that just little list of seats just there, that's enough. That's all they got to do.
Mm. Yeah, I don't think the Liberals are as far behind as the Kentucky Derby winner was, but they've got some ground to make up. And for our listeners, get onto YouTube and have a look at that. It's quite a win.
Came from nowhere, 80-1, yes. The winner of this year's Kentucky Derby. So I haven't done much reading on it, Jack. I'm going to have a look, because anything gets up at 80-1, there's got to be a reason. And there might be some sort of nefarious goings on there.
Well, it is racing, you know.
It is horse racing, and you do have a number of members of the Italian-American community there who are also involved in the racing industry at one level or another. So, we'll have a look at that. We'll probably touch on that in the Two Jacks Around the World.
I was told years ago by a chap who was involved in the racing industry to remember one thing: people in racing are only ever as honest as they need to be.
That works in politics too, Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah, only as honest as your MP needs to be. Which leads me to my best bet. We're getting towards, critical stage now, where if you've got a lazy pineapple or two to throw around on the bet on the political markets, on the election market, my best bet is independence. Now, I'll clarify this, because the bookies are a little bit sneaky about how they define independence. But my best bet is for the independence 10 or more at $9. Now, they call, as I said before, Rebecca Sharkey, sneaky buggers. They call her she's from the Centre Alliance, which really isn't a thing anymore, because she is part of that Teal Independence group, Climate 200 group. But they're calling her a part. She's party aligned. So that would mean the 3 that are there plus 7. And that's paying $9. By the way, if you think that's a bit strong, that they'll get plus 3, plus 6, that's paying $13. 9 independents is paying $13. 8 is paying $9. The 10 or more I like, because I just feel that's the way we're going to go. There are a number of independents, not Teal independents, who are having a crack. There's one in Page. There's another in your old stomping ground of Nichols in rural Victoria, central rural Victoria, who are half a chance. So I'm saying get on the independents, not all Teal independents, but all independents as defined by the bookies, 10 or more, for every $1 you put down on that, you'll get 9 back.
Well, I can't comment on that. I'm a law-abiding resident of the Special Administrative Region of Hong Kong, and no gambling here is allowed unless it goes through the Hong Kong Jockey Club. So I won't be having a bet.
Not having a bet. Oh, well, never mind. Never mind. You might have to go to Macau.
If only we could go to Macau.
Oh, that's right.
We haven't been able to go to Macau for 2 years.
Can't go to Macau. Where I think things have gone a little bit tits up there for some of the Australian lads involved, Jack.
Well, they built this beautiful new bridge that runs across. You haven't got to catch the ferry anymore. You can go across by train, but by road, but you can't.
You can't at the moment. Anyway, that's my best bet. I reckon it's a good thing. And just so you know, I have had a lash on that. 10 or more independents in the 47th Parliament, and that's paying $9. And finally, Jack, well, not quite finally, but our cat that does the ironing election issue is, we call it the Peter Knott Memorial, named after the wonderful Labor MP, Peter Knott, briefly a member for Gilmore, who had one or two problems along the way there, upset Paul Keating and received the moniker as the cunt from the pie shop forevermore after that. And, of course, Peter Knott ran afoul of the Labor Party ultimately after describing the 9/11 thing as an inside job. And Peter's now left us. So this is why we call it the Peter Knott Memorial. And this week, Jack, we've got the FON candidate in Banks. His name's Malcolm Heffernan. But he's not just the FON candidate in Banks. He's also having a dip for the Australian Federation Party in Brand in Western Australia.
Well, he's having 2 goes.
He's having a couple of goes. And not just in their own state or next door. He figures he's such a large political fellow that he can cover 2 seats 4,000 kilometres apart.
Brand's Kim Beazley's old seat, I think, isn't it?
That's right. Yes. Well, when the AEC looked at the nominations, he will appear on both ballots, by the way. When they looked at the nominations, obviously it's a fairly serious offence because, as when people go to the polls and the AEC official asks you, have you voted earlier today, and you say no because you're a law-abiding person, there's a very similar question on the candidate nomination form. Have you nominated for another seat? Because if you have, you can't nominate for a second. But Malcolm Heffernan has actually laid the blame fairly and squarely at Paul N. Hanson's One Nation for popping him into Banks without his knowledge. And there has been quite a bit of discussion about Paul N. Hanson's One Nation candidates. They do have candidates in all 151 elections, but a lot of them, they're calling them ghosts, Jack, because they can't be found.
Well, there's a long history of this sort of thing happening down the years. I know the Labor Party used to scratch around to find candidates for rural seats, so who would get to be the candidate up in Mildura or something, and because they mightn't even have any local members up there, so they'd scratch around head office and. Someone would suddenly find out that they were standing for a seat they'd never been to.
There's the Labor member for Goldstein, Jack. This is one of the Teal independent seats, Goldstein, in Melbourne inner south, and Zoe Daniels, the Teal independent candidate there, and Tim Wilson is the sitting Liberal member. And the Labor candidate, look, he's definitely, he's not been blindsided. Let's say he's not doing a lot of work on the hustings. He's got the only sign visible anywhere in the seat is I think above his parents' office, and that's it. That's a small poster, and that's about it. So maybe this is a bit of a thing now that you never know. You better check because you might be the might be the One Nation candidate in Nichols, Jack. You could pop
I
up
could
there.
be. Yeah.
You could be. Poor old Malcolm Heffernan. He was the man who thinks that 2 nominations is barely enough. Has basically pointed the finger back at Pauline Hanson's One Nation, because he is looking at a prosecution and have the federal police knocking on the door.
Yeah, well, he's going to have to answer for that, isn't he? He's going to have to blame somebody. It'll be Pauline.
By the way, the Australian Federation Party, they're all soft-sits. They're complete nut jobs who actually think that the election is illegal anyway. So, I'm not sure what they're trying to achieve by putting candidates in an election that they consider to be illegal and fraudulent, by the way.
I think it's a good thing when we have these people exposing themselves at election time. It's good for the country.
Jack, it's going to get very serious this week, isn't it? It's if we're right, and if Scott Morrison is behind and the coalition's behind, what are they going to do? Is there going to be a desperation about what they get up to this week?
Well, that's kind of the wrong thing to do. The right thing to do, I think, if you're trying to come from where the coalition is now, is to do the things that work and just do them better.
So what have they got to do? They've got to attack Elbows, a bloke who's not across his portfolio or any other. They've got to run. I guess it's a fairly unconvincing line, but they've got to run we are the party of government. We are the right party to take you through what are difficult times. What else have they got to do? They start throwing money around?
So that means you put the right people front and centre. So a fair bit of Scott Morrison, true. The bloke I would have out there having a go at Elbow and pushing that we are the right people to keep going would be Dutton.
Yeah, he's gone pretty quiet. I mean, he did mention on Anzac Day, which is pretty bloody ordinary, by the way, that we had to prepare for war. Perhaps should have chosen a better day to talk about that. So he's been pretty quiet since. He looks to be rock solid in Dixon, so it's not as if he's been having to work hard in his own local electorate. But
he can deliver a message. He can get out there on the media, and he's solid and can deliver a message. People don't like him much, but he can deliver a message.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think it's a bit like the Barnaby line. South of the Murray, I think he's very, very unpopular. But up in Queensland, where they are looking vulnerable, that might be a good place for him to move out. The problem they've got, Jack, is that they've lost so many. I mean, Greg Hunt is retiring. He's been reasonably active in the campaign, but they're better performers. Frydenberg's busy. He's got to be working in his own local electorate to save himself there in Kooyong. Greg Hunt, another good performer, retiring. So there's not a lot of talent there. There is Peter Dutton, of course, as you mentioned, but Alan Tudge he's in witness protection. There's not a lot. There's not a lot of there. All of a sudden, Simon Birmingham's become the minister for everything.
Well, I'm not sure why Alan Tudge is in witness protection. They've kind of frightened themselves. They've spooked themselves about that. What they should have done with Alan Tudge was to do a bit of Boris Johnson, Bob Hawke, and say, "Look, yep, I had an affair. It didn't end well. They often don't."
Well, it is voluntary. He's in the witness protection of his own accord. He is. I think Morrison says that he's still a member of the cabinet, but he's not a minister at this particular juncture, which is a very strange thing. Very strange. We have entire groups of Buddhist monks probably contemplating that right now, Jack, in Hong Kong.
They probably are. Yeah.
Well, they got the day off.
So that's what they need to be doing that. Yeah. And Labor.
What about Labor? Yes. Go on.
Labor really just needs to keep putting one foot in front of the other, Have a little word to elbow. Don't answer so many questions at press conferences. Don't answer any.
Don't worry about the homework, Albo.
Yeah.
Don't worry about just sitting in your motel room and poring over policy documents. Just say it's. And let me introduce you to the minister, or to the shadow spokesman responsible.
If the minister's not there, just say they'll be making an announcement about it next week.
Exactly right. Yes. We seem to have solved that problem for Elbo. I hope he's listening, or some of his people are. But also, Jack, they'll be wanting to get that message across of old, tired government that's run out of legs. That's the big thing.
It's just about the only way. It's not quite the only way you win government in Australia from opposition, but it's the most common way of winning government in Australia from opposition.
I think the days of exciting the population with reform and a new bright policy agenda, I think those days are over. So you really need to be able to convince the people that the current mob have run out of legs.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that you would be a little bit steadier and a little bit more energetic. So the secret for that is don't look like you're sort of making a mistake every 5 minutes.
That's right, exactly right. Yeah, just so look, Elbo's got it basically right. Gaffs notwithstanding, he's basically saying, look, we're going to be pretty much the same as the other mob, except we'll just have a bit more enthusiasm.
Yep. Yeah.
All right, great to hear from you, Jack. Thank you so much. You enjoy the rest of Buddha's birthday.
When I work out how to celebrate it,
yeah. It's not an easy thing. I mean, it wouldn't seem right to sit down and have a steak, for example. You might have to have sort of several bowls of crickets or something like that.
Yeah.
And so thank you to our listeners, and we just want to remind you that we'd love to hear from you too. If you want to let us know what you think of the show, or give us a bit of a fillip on social media, please do so. But if you want to let us know what you think of the show, or any suggestions, any sort of comment whatsoever, even vicious criticism, Jack, no matter how bad it is, we will accept it. So drop us a line on the Conditional Release Program at gmail.com and tell us your darkest thoughts on the program. Thank you, Jack.
In fact, the tougher the criticism is, the more we'll like it.
Now, we'll laugh at it. All right, mate. Good stuff. And we'll catch you next week, listeners.